Simplifying Algebraic Expressions. This is a video introducing and applying the property of -1 for multiplication to simplify algebraic expressions. Examples are shown and explained to help students better understand the concept and learn this critical skill for algebra. But before we continue, it is assumed that you have a mastery of combining signed numbers, combining similar or like terms, and arranging terms in descending degree were already introduced. It can also help if we can recall properties of operations, specifically the distributive property. Don't worry though, we'll still try to explain some previous topics naman as we go along, so oks lang. You can click the links in the description below to go to specific exercises. Although I highly recommend watching every example as you may learn something from each one of them. Now, before we simplify expressions, let us discuss first the property of -1 for multiplication. This is a very important concept as many students find difficulty when tasked to simplify given negative signs. Now, according to this property, for every real number a, -1 times a is equal to -a, and a times -1 is equal to -a. This practically means that when you see a negative sign before a variable, like -a, there is a numerical coefficient, -1, being multiplied before or after that variable. Now, this information may not mean much now, but can help us understand better and therefore simplify correctly some algebraic expressions. Let us look at some expressions that involve using this property to be simplified correctly. Let's try and simplify some algebraic expressions with the help of the -1 property of multiplication. Now let's look at example number 1. We have a negative sign here before the quantity 3x minus 2. Now, let us simplify this using two methods. Of course, there are many ways of solving this, but let me show you two methods. Let's look at method A. Now recall, whenever you're given a negative sign before something or any value, what does that mean again? The -1 property is saying that we have a -1 that is being multiplied by this quantity. So we replace negative with -1. Then we copy 3x minus 2. Now, what do we do next? Since we have a number before this quantity, and you cannot simplify these because they are unlike terms, one way to do this is you distribute -1. So knowing that we have a -1 to be distributed here is very important. So let's set this up. So we have -1, i-multiply natin kay 3x. And then write plus para walang malilito. Next, you distribute -1 and take note our second term is actually -2. So negative belongs to 2, so our second term is -2. So you multiply -1 by -2. Next, what do? We multiply these because according to the GEMDAS rule, we multiply first before adding. So let's try and do that. We have -1 times 3x is -3x. And then plus -1 times -2 is +2. And finally, let's check. Is this in descending order of degree? Yes, it is because ang exponent nito is 1, therefore decreasing order of degree. Now, we can say then that this is the simplified form of this first example. Now, it took some time before we arrived at the answer. Let's have a second way of solving this. Let's call it method B. Now, instead of writing -1 pa, because that's what the -1 property of multiplication is telling us, we can immediately distribute the negative sign. Anong ibig mong sabihin, sir? Pwedeng i-distribute ka agad. Let's try. Negative times 3x, -3x. Next, negative times negative is positive. And then, simply copy 2. So we arrive at the answer faster this time. But of course, ang basis nitong shortcut na to is from the negative 1 property for multiplication. That's how we do it. Now, let's look at example number 2. Again, let's show two ways of solving this just so we can practice the negative 1 property. Now, we have negative there. We have a tendency to immediately cancel this one, sir, kasi we can multiply naman. But take note, this negative here, this one, does not belong to negative a only. This negative should be distributed to both terms. So you cannot simply cancel them. Okay, so just to make sure, dahan-dahanin natin, what do you mean by negative again? We have a negative 1 before it. So let's replace that with negative 1. And then copy negative a plus 4. And of course, we know that we should distribute negative 1. Again, let's set it up. So negative 1 multiplied by negative a. But as we said earlier, negative 1 does not belong only to negative a. It belongs to 4. It belongs to 4 then. So we have negative 1 times 4. So we're done setting up. What we can now do is multiply. So negative 1 times negative a is positive a. Then, plus negative 1 times 4 is negative 4. But this is not yet simplified. Writing it as plus negative, medyo nakakalito for some. So simplifying, it's the same thing as a minus 4. Is this in descending order of degree? Yes, the constant comes last. Therefore, it's in descending order of degree. Therefore, the answer is a minus 4. However, let me try and show you another way, a faster way using this same method. So instead of writing pa yung negative 1 dito, what we can do is immediately distribute that negative sign. So doing that, we have negative times negative is positive. I don't even need to write that sign. And then we have a. But take note, you should distribute negative then with 4. So negative times positive is negative. And then copy 4. We end up with the same answer, although a lot faster this time. Let's have some more examples. Let's say we're asked to simplify 2a minus 3 minus the quantity a plus 2. Now, how do we use the negative 1 property to do this faster? So again, let's try to look at it two ways or solve this two ways. Let me call this method A. First, we know that we should solve a plus 2 first because the GEMDAS rule tells us we should combine anything within groups first. However, we cannot combine them since they are unlike terms. So anong gagawin natin dapat? Now, make sure you know what this negative sign means. Using the negative 1 property, let me bring down these first two terms muna, 2a minus 3. And then, notice that negative here means may negative 1. But before that, para hindi ka malito, this means may plus muna, and then we have a negative 1 before this group. They should be the same. So copying, we have a plus 2. Ulit, remember when you have a negative sign like this, para kang nag-a-add ng negative 1 na minumultiply mo sa quantity a plus 2. So these two are the same. Now, how do we simplify this? Dahan-dahan lang, according to the GEMDAS rule, you multiply first before adding or subtracting. Let's try and do that. Copy muna yung 2a and minus 3. And then, let's distribute this negative 1 here. Let's set that up. We have negative 1 times a. And then plus, we have negative 1 times positive 2. So finally, we can do our multiplication. So we can simplify and multiply these two first. What do we do with the others? Copy lang muna tayo. So we now have 2a minus 3 and then plus. What is negative 1 times a? It's the negative of a. And then plus. What's negative 1 times 2? It's the negative of 2. Now, wala na tayong pwedeng i-multiply pa. So finally, we can do addition and subtraction. But take note, you cannot combine unlike terms. Let me underline 2a and look for a similar or like term of 2a. Meron tayong negative a, so let me underline that. Meaning, I can combine these similar terms. What is 2a plus negative? Take note, may 1 dyan. So 2a plus negative 1a is 2 plus negative 1 or simply 1. And then copy the literal coefficient a. Done with 2a and negative 1a. Next, constant. Let me double underline negative 3. Meron bang constant na pwedeng i-add sa kanya? Meron. We have negative 2. So we have negative 3 plus negative 2. Parehong utang, therefore, ano ang sagot? E di utang din. So it's plus negative 5. Because negative 3, dagdagan mo ng negative 2 is negative 5. However, we know this is not yet simplified. Unang-una, we have 1 here. It's not simplified. So we simply write a lang para mas simple nga. And then plus negative, the simpler way of writing it is minus. Before we check, before we say that this is the final answer, is this in descending order of degree? Yes, it is, because the constant comes last. Therefore, we now have the answer of a minus 5. Now, we did this, tama naman ang method, using the negative 1 property. But it took too long to solve. So again, let me try and show you a faster way of doing this. We know, of course, again, we can distribute this negative sign. So anong gagawin muna natin sa iba? Copy. We have 2a minus 3. And then, negative times a is negative a. And then negative times 2 is negative 2. And then we can combine like terms. 2a and negative a are like terms. What is 2a minus 1a is equal to 1a. And then negative 3 minus 2 is equal to negative 5. But of course, you can simplify it further by simply removing that one and end up with the same answer but a lot faster this time. Now, you may want to use this method over this method. However, don't forget where we got this shortcut here. We can do this shortcut because of the negative 1 property of multiplication. Now, last example ng simplifying nito. Now, example number 4. What if we're asked to simplify this expression? Take note, we have a grouping symbol here, another grouping symbol here. According to the GEMDAS rule, we should combine them first. However, they are unlike terms, so you cannot combine them. These two are also unlike terms, so we cannot combine them. So anong gagawin na nga natin pag ganon? We should distribute what we can. However, if we look at our first group here, anong problema? Sir, anong i-distribute mo yan? Take note, meron diyang numerical coefficient na 1, right? So you can distribute it there. Therefore, it's equal to 16x. 1 times negative 11 is negative 11. Actually, whenever you see a grouping symbol, walang nakalagay before it, you can simply drop the parenthesis. Tanggalin mo na yung parenthesis. It's just like distributing this one there. Okay? Now, it's very important also that you know that we have a negative number here that needs to be distributed dito. So how do you do that? You can rewrite it using a longer way pero at least malinaw na way. You can simply rewrite this as minus means plus negative 3, isn't it? So, let me rewrite first para walang lito. Okay, so minus 3 times 2x plus 4 means plus the negative of 3 times 2x plus 4. Again, copy muna ito and then distribute negative 3. Let's set it up. We now have plus negative 3 times 2x. Okay? And then, plus negative 3 times 4. Okay, kung medyo hindi ka pa sanay, you can do this para hindi ka malito. Dahan-dahan. We now have 16x minus 11 plus, what is negative 3 times 2x? It's negative 6x. And then plus, what is negative 3 times 4? It's negative 12. And then, katulad ng ginagawa natin previously, we can combine like terms. What is 16x plus negative 6x? 16 plus negative 6 is 10x. And then, we can double underline this to indicate na ito are like terms. What is negative 11 plus negative 12? It's plus the negative of 23. Dalawang negative, ang sum nila, negative din. However, you know that this is not yet in simplest form. We can simplify it further by writing 10x minus 23. So this now is the simplified form of that one. Now let's try and solve this faster. Now from our previous method of solving this, we know that we can simply drop the parenthesis 16x minus 11. So tanggalin mo lang yon. Now, a faster way of doing this is, take note, we can distribute negative 3. And how do you do that? So, dahan-dahan, signs first, step by step. Negative times positive is negative. Next, multiply the numerical coefficients. 3 times 2 is 6. Then, copy the literal coefficient. Done distributing negative 3 to 2x. Next, distribute negative 3 to 4. Signs first. Negative times positive is negative. Then numerical coefficients only. 3 times 4 is 12. Next, we can now combine like terms. We have 16x minus 6x. What is 16x minus 6x? It's 10x. And then the constant, negative 11, let me double underline, and then negative 12. What is negative 11 minus 12? It's negative 23. And there you have it. You now have the answer, and you got this using a faster method. So, again, if you can try and use this shortcut, please do. Mas mabilis, just be careful. But don't forget, the shortcut comes from this method. Example number 5 is a possible application of simplifying algebraic expressions in geometry. We are tasked to get the perimeter of this figure with given dimensions in terms of the variable a. We know that to get the perimeter, we simply get the sum of all the sides of the figure. Let us try and show 2 ways to solve this. First way, let us list and add all the sides. Let us quickly do that, making sure that every side is accounted for. Now, let's try to simplify by combining like terms. But before we do that, notice that we have a grouping symbol here, a plus 6 and a plus 6. And the GEMDAS rule tells us that we should combine this group first. However, they are dissimilar terms, therefore we cannot combine them. How do we do this then? Well, just like what we have done earlier, when you have parentheses and when you sort of have a numerical coefficient before each parenthesis, we distribute this one. Or, a faster way of doing this is simply drop the parenthesis. Like so. So, ang gawin natin, copy muna. We have 3a, 3a. So, ang gawin natin, we drop the parenthesis. Okay, now, we can finally combine like terms. Let me underline 3a and look for similar terms. We underline also positive 3a here because they have the same literal coefficient, which is a. Also this one, this one, this one, and this one. Now, it's a good habit, as we said, to underline including the sign. Also, we have to know or recall that when you have a here, we have a numerical coefficient equal to 1, which should be added together with all the numerical coefficients. We have 3 plus 3 plus 1, 3 plus 3 plus 1, which is equal to 14a. And finally, we look at our constant, positive 6. Also underline this, another constant term. So we end up with 12. As you can see, we have the constant term last. Therefore, we know that this is in descending degree of order. Therefore, this is the final answer. The perimeter then is 14a plus 12 units. Now, although we have solved this, medyo matagal. We wrote so many terms here. Now, let's try to solve this using another method. But this time, hopefully, it will be quicker. Now, how do we do that? Notice that we have 3a here, 3a, 3a, and 3a. We actually have 4 equal sides. So instead of adding all of these, what we can do is the shortcut for repeated addition, which is multiplication. So I suggest that we multiply 4 by 3a because it's the same thing as adding 3a 4 times. And then we have accounted 3a na. Let's account for the last two sides. A plus 6. We have 2 8 plus 6's, therefore 2 times a plus 6. Next, we simplify. Multiply 4 times 3a. Multiplying their numerical coefficients, 4 times 3 is 12. And then simply copy the literal coefficient a. Now, before we continue, some of us might have a tendency to distribute 4 here. Now, of course, we know that that is incorrect. You can only distribute when you have 2 terms here in this parenthesis. In this case, you only have 1 term, which is 3a. So, simply multiply the numerical coefficients and then copy the literal coefficient. Now, to compare it with the next part of our solution, notice here we have plus. So, we now have 2 terms, a and 6. Now, this is the correct time to apply distribution of 2. Doing that, we now have 2 times a, which is 2a, and then 2 times 6, which is 12. Again, you do not distribute 4 here because this has only 1 term. You distribute 2 here because this has 2 terms, a and 6. Continuing solving, we now have 12a plus 2a, which are like terms. We have 14a. And then finally plus 12, which is equal to what we previously solved. Now, of course, we would recommend using this one. It's a faster way, it's a correct way, and it's the best way of solving. Just be careful when distributing. I hope you learned a lot with these examples and will be able to apply them in simplifying algebraic expressions. See you in the next video! Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Happy solving!